Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today, wherever you happen to be in the world. I'm Doug Silliman, president of the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and I want to welcome you all to today's program, Iraq's October Elections, a game changer or more of the same. With the preliminaries out of the way, let me introduce today's very, very good set of panelists. Munqith Dagher is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Independent Institute of Administration and Civil Society Studies in Iraq and a Gallup International Board member. He is also a non-resident senior associate and the Arlie A. Burke Chair in Strategy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He holds a PhD in Public Administration from the University of Baghdad's College of Administration and Economics and conducted Iraq's first ever public opinion poll in 2003. Dr. Dagher, welcome.
Thank you.
Rahman Al-Jebouri is a senior fellow at the Institute of Regional and International Studies at the American University of Iraq, Sulaimani, and president of the Political Leadership and Governance Development Academy. He previously served as associate director for the Middle East and North Africa at the National Endowment for Democracy. Throughout his career, he has overseen local initiatives that attempt to empower citizens, monitor human rights, and hold governments accountable to their citizens. He's featured regularly in Iraqi and regional media. Mr. Jebouri, welcome.
Thank you.
Patricia Karam is the regional director for the Middle East North Africa division at the International Republican Institute. She's held other senior managerial positions at several NGOs, including as Middle East North Africa Director at the Natural Resource Governance Institute and as a Deputy Director at the International Center for Transitional Justice. She also worked at the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Iraq Foundation, and the Embassy of Iraq in Washington, D.C. She studied at Brown University and Georgetown University and did her PhD work at New York University's Law and Society program. Dr. Karam, welcome. And our moderator for today's program is Geneive Abdo. She's an author of 4 books on contemporary Islam, and her current research focuses on Shia-Sunni relations with a particular focus on Arab Shia communities. She was formerly a visiting scholar at the Brookings Doha Center and a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington. She also was a research director at the United Nations on a project aimed at bridging the divide between Islamic societies and Western governments. And she is currently a visiting fellow here at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. So Geneive, happy to have you with us today and leading the program. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Doug, and welcome. Good afternoon, good morning to our audience. On October 10th, Iraqis will go to the polls in national elections aimed at forming a new government. The elections will take place as they have been in the past, amid the backdrop of multiple crises in the country, a campaign of violence and intimidation against a 2-year protest movement. That's something new. We haven't seen this level of protest in Iraq since 2003. An anemic economy, deficient services, including electricity shortages, and a competition for the future control of the country between Iranian-backed Shia militias on the one side and cleric civil society and some state institutions on the other. All of these conditions have created a crisis of legitimacy for the state, with a decreasing number of Iraqis believing in their government or their own ability to enact change, according to a number of opinion polls, which we will see in the next few moments. Thus, on the surface, it would seem that there's a lot at stake in this election in October. But the response from society has been something that's a bit surprising. Instead of mobilizing to try to bring about change through the ballot box, malaise has set in among many Iraqis. Major political figures and protest leaders who in fact demanded that the elections be held early. So these elections are being held now rather than in 2022. That has been one of the demands of the protest movement. And even though this is happening, this kind of malaise, even though some very influential clerics, including Ayatollah Sistani and Prime Minister Mustafa Kadhimi, are urging a high voter turnout, Since the formation of an Iraqi state after the 2003 US-led invasion, Iraqi elections have always been riddled with a lack of transparency, confusion, and deal-making long after the polls have closed. So in a sense, the negotiations for the formation of a new government happen after the elections are held and the polls are closed, which is very problematic and certainly one factor in the discontent among voters. The challenges to the system are not coming from the minority Kurds or Sunnis this time, but from Shia-dominated parties and groups. A vicious circle is developing. The same Shia parties and groups who are demanding change are now boycotting the polls and trying to persuade others to follow. Should a massive boycott occur, which is expected, the state could become even more illegitimate in the eyes of Iraqis and the international community. And certainly protests are likely to emerge again and erupt, perhaps on the scale that we saw in 2019 and 2020. There are primarily two schools of thought about the election, and we'll hear more about this from our excellent panel in the next few moments. There are some optimists who forecast that the election will not be the way it was in 2018, which also had a low voter turnout, but will bring about change and will be the first step toward incremental change in Iraq. These optimists look to the protest movement and say that there has been a dynamic shift in the political landscape, that even though this generation, this young generation of voters will not necessarily change the system this time, that it will be an incremental change over time. The pessimists, however, believe that the election outcome will be a boycott and that the same older generation of Shia political elites will prevail. Today, we will hear about the pre-election environment in Iraq, the state of public opinion, and whether the election monitoring by the UN and other international institutions will provide transparency, more transparency than in the past, and ensure a legitimate election. So I would like to turn first to Rahman to explain what the climate is in Iraq at this point. He is in Iraq and he can give us some details about the level of discontent and what we can sort of expect in the run-up to the election. So Rahman, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Geneive. Thank you, Ambassador. Looking forward to discussion actually more than to give remarks. Before that, I will just say on my bio, I was advisor for a prime minister. I left that job to focus on the leadership academy because that's what needed right now in Iraq. Let me start with one thing, is this election is totally different from any past election we had in Iraq for two reasons. The first one, we have a new election law, which is totally different from the past election, which is now we have 83 districts, and that has a huge impact on local level and national level. Second, the pressure that created by the protester in October and also changed the environment and the political landscape in Iraq. Let me, then I'll go over the turnout and the boycott, and then I move for the major coalition and player in this election and government formation. I hope I will do this all in 5 to 7 minutes and then leave the best for the discussion. Iraq changed a new election law as a demand, as a big demand for the protester. So we moved from Iraq 1 district, and in the last election, Iraq is 18 district to 83 district. That's changed the whole environment of election in Iraq. With this in a new law, that's pushed a new phenomenon in Iraq, is first, even the old guards, old political party guards, now they are looking for a good qualified candidates, because now the candidate themselves has to deal with the people in their district. So we see better candidate in this round than others. Also, each sub-district has different environment from another one. In one district in Iraq, we see 150 candidates for 5 seats. In one district in Iraq, in Dagher, I think there is 7 candidates for a 3 seat only. So it's not like before you can collect all your numbers and then you divide the seat. That's one. Second, the pressure that came with the protest. Now, I think there is more credibility in this election, although the environment not much change, but at least there is a public pressure on the IHAC, there is public pressure on the UN, there is a public pressure on the Iraqi government and the Iraqi parliament. No cheating this time, people are watching. So this kind of the environment, we will go over in the discussion what that means. Turnout, it is really hard to say if this election is going to have much better turnout or less turnout from the last election. We were discussing this earlier. Each district is going to be totally different turnout from the other district. In one district could be 80% people show for election. It is, again, it is moved by the local candidate, by the local factors. In other district, might you find 10% show up. So we cannot say and the turnout in the whole country is going to be probably 35%, because it is different from one place to another place. So that's on the turnout. And the boycott, we know there are people from the protest, there are people from Ayad Allawi list, there are people from different party already boycott this election. As people has a trust in this election, people are still very suspicious about this election and the cheating, because it is history repeating itself. Who is running in this election? Who are the major kind of the coalition or blocks in this election? Again, if I go, sadly, I will go on Shia, Sunnah, the Kurds. In the Shia area, there are 3 major blocks in this election. The Sadrist, who they came back and they're going to join. So that's one of the major kind of, I think they are running about 62 candidates. The second kind of the coalition come after them, which is, we all know, Al-Fatah coalition. And also, I think they are running about 70 candidates in different, so see, these are the major from the last election, the major winner from the last election, number 1, number 2. And then the third one is the national state, which is, Al-Hikmah, Al-Abadi, and others join them to kind of join each other. So this is the major in the Shia area. Of course, there are Al-Maliki, which is still a player, but he's not in a coalition, he's by himself. There are few movement from the protest in the south in Baghdad, but they are really not a big player. They don't have the finance, they don't have the machine to run an election like this. So it's still work in a process, basically. When we pass kind of these 3 coalition and go to the Sunni area, or the major Sunni, there is 2 kind of blocks. One is Taqaddum, which is headed by the Speaker of Iraqi Parliament, Mohammed al-Halbousi, and the second one is Azm, run by Sheikh Khamis al-Khanjar. So these are the major kind of 2 political blocks will be represented and in the Sunni area. The Kurds is not much change, at all. The same, the same 2 party running. One is going to control Sulaimani, the second is going to control Dagher and Erbil, and probably part of Kirkuk. One thing is, I think I'm passing 5 minutes. One thing is, we are not sure about who is going to be the winner of this election and how many seats they will get. Probably nobody is going to pass 35 seats because it's totally different. So as anybody can bring more than 35 seats will win kind of the election, will be asked to nominate the prime minister, but again, nothing is guaranteed. The formation of government this time is going to be hard process. Literally, I'm saying right now, if it is as a result of election, not as a result of negotiation. Probably people start negotiation right now. So because we have kind of 6-7 groups, each groups right now start marketing their prime minister. Probably will last 2 to 3 months to get kind of an idea who's the prime minister of Iraq. I'll stop here. I'd like to have more kind of question. The question always get the best of me, so I'll stop here.
Thank you, Rahman, and thank you so much for clarifying the election law, because reading it from afar, it's very complicated, and so it's very helpful to know how it will be applied in practice. And we will, of course, discuss more details later. So I'll turn now to Munqith, if you could please share your wonderful slides with us and tell us a bit about Iraqi public opinion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today with this great panel and audience. Hopefully, the slides, the deck of slides now started to show up. This election, as Rahman referred, is totally different election because of many factors. The first factor is the current voting system, which is the SNTV, single non-transferable vote, made it very difficult for pollsters, for observers to estimate the expected results with 83 different constituencies. Also, it's different because it's the first early election in Iraq after 2003. At least, technically, it's early elections. Some people say that it's semi-early election because it's only 5 or 6 months left to the original date of election, which should be next April. Anyway, the contradiction here, which is a very significant contradiction, while this early election was a strong demand made by protesters during 2019 and early of 2020 to change the current system peacefully and the current political level peacefully. Right now, those protesters, most of them, they will boycott the election, and it becomes actually the early election, it becomes a demand of the same political parties that the protesters went against it. So the situation has changed. Those who wanted the election are not interested in going to the election. Those who were against the early election, they become the fans and the supporter of the new of this election, which that for sure will have a very negative consequences. And this is what really bothering me and make me very concerned, especially with the numbers that I will share with you. The estimate, as I've told you, it's very difficult right now to give numbers about the turnout, but all polls that we did till now shows that these numbers will be lower than 2018. It's worse than 2018. My estimation right now, it's around, if we go with figures, it's around 30%. It's going up and down, but the concern here is that there is a trend in my polls showing the continuous and stable decline in the support of the election among Iraqis. Actually, if we go to the third slide, can we go to the third slide, please? Yes. As you can see here, from all elections took place in Iraq since 2005, there was a continuous decline in the turnout. And when I did a study on that, that went shoulder by shoulder with the level of trust of Iraqis in the official institutions of the state in Iraq. So on 2005, where we had officially, these are the official number from the IHEC, when we had 79% turnout, the level of trust in Iraqi state was very high. And it went down steadily as the level of turnout went also steadily down during all these elections. Right now, the level of trust in the institutions, whether judiciary institution, whether executive branch, whether the legislative branch, is in its lower bottom. So this make me think that the next election will be also a lower point in the history of election in Iraq. And what make me, as I've told you, more concerned is what people feel about this election. They're feeling that this election is not a game changer. This election will not give them a real voice in the political process. If we go to slide number 4 here, slide number 4, please. First of all, they don't trust, still Iraqis don't trust IHEC. As you can see, if you go, when we ask about how confident, if at all, are you in the IHEC ability to organize this and supervise the election, if you take a look to the 2 bars on the right, little confident and not confident at all is around 75%. So around 75% of Iraqis, they don't have a real confidence in IHEC. And though I can say that from my observation to the IHEC, from what I know about what IHEC is doing, trying to do, things looks better on the technical side than other election. They are doing a lot of efforts. The UN is trying to help, but the election has 2 sides. The technical side, which I don't think that we will have much problem as we usually have had. Sorry. What concerns me is the other side, which is the environmental aspect. Militias, the general atmosphere of mistrust This is the real concern in my side. Let me give you more example on what I'm saying. If we go to number 5, here the question about, do you think the results of the election that will be held in October will lead to improve the situation in Iraq? As you can see, the red bars total around 2/3 of Iraqis on the left side. In total, they disagree that this election will improve the situation. What even make it give me more concern is the real concern concerns are in Shia's areas. As you can see, and this you will see it in all slides, always Shias are more pessimistic, which means that those who went to protest are still unhappy about the process and how things are evolving. And this gives more opportunity for instability after the election. I have a big concern about what could happen after the election, regardless of who will win this election. If we go to number 6, please. As you can see here also in this question, do you think that the results of the election that will be held in October will lead to a severe security and political disturbance? Almost 70% of Iraqis expect severe security and political disturbance after and this jump in the Shia's areas, as you can see, to reach more than 75%. If we go to number 7, do you think that the results of the election that will be held in October will lead to bring back October protests to the streets? For sure, the people they think that it will the protests will come back to the streets, especially in Shia's areas. As you can see, among Shias, 71% think that after the election, the protests will come back again. Number 8, please. So, increase the influence of the armed militias. Will this election increase? Yes, as you can see here, people expect a significant increase in the influence of the armed militias. And tell you something, the armed militias, usually they participated in the previous elections, but not as they are in this. I mean, we have more militias joined with there and under different umbrella, different names, join the election. So we expect more of these militia representatives in the next parliament. Number 9, do you think that the results of the election that will be held in October will lead to increase the influence of the current ruling parties? And we ask this question because we know that the protesters, they went to the streets on October 2019 against the current ruling parties. So they expect that the ruling parties will continue in its influence. And as Rahman said, we cannot expect a significant change in the political landscape in Iraq after the election. Last but not least, yes. How confident are you in the government of Iraq will be able to ensure the following during the upcoming election in Iraq? Secure ballots. As you can see also, people does not expect that these ballots will be secured, and so they don't think that it will be a fair election. These unfortunate indicators give me the sense that the next election will not be a game changer, and I will leave this to you to ask the questions and to have some kind of discussion after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've given us so much data to try to forecast what will happen after October 10th. And it seems, obviously, from what you're saying, that most of the demands of the protesters have sort of been all for naught. I mean, there will be more protests on the streets. The militias have an upper hand. The Shia political elites, the established, will just remain in power. So sadly, it doesn't seem that the demands of the protest movement will be in any way addressed by this election. And we'll get to more of these issues in a few moments. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Geneive. I will try, to provide some synthesis based on what my colleagues have said, but also to try to kind of, strike a note between being pessimistic and optimistic, as you pointed out in your opening remarks. So I have a few just overarching comments. The first one, clearly, despite the pressure created by the protest movement, which Rahman pointed to, the protest movement or the new voices did not really transform or had not really transformed into a viable political opposition. So the reality is that, unfortunately, the protest movement didn't graduate to become a political counter movement. The parties interested in reform, the reality is, the parties interested in change and reform, whether they fell within the enduring opposition actors like the Communist Party or the People for Reform, the Democratic Social Trend, or the new parties, the nascent fledgling parties that are emanating from the Tishreen revolution, which I'm sure my colleagues can speak about in great detail, have not been able to formulate a coherent alternative to the political class. And again, as my fellow panelists have pointed out, the demands for change and early elections were not really met by good presence, leadership, message, or programs for change. And again, as is often the case, issues of leadership, ownership, ego sort of hinder alliance or coalition building, but also the challenges that these entities faced ranged from sort of internal disagreements about demands and distrust, but also legitimate fears of infiltration by either malign actors or by traditional parties. And often the absence of a defined leader, a coherent agenda, was a function of the risk it would pose to the individuals proponing. Again, the militias have threatened all of the named leaders, and it's not unlikely that they'd simply assassinate anyone who sought to be the opposition. But against all odds, and maybe we can talk about this, I'll stray for a second, maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A, there seems to be an official opposition forming, and perhaps Rahman can talk about this a little bit, though it's unclear whether it's going to get its act together before the elections. And again, based on our work, the work of IRI, this political opposition project, as it's manifesting itself, is led by a Beit al-Watani, as it's referred to. And what's interesting about this opposition in the making, regardless of elections, and I think this is a step in the right direction in terms of forming an opposition, dissociating it from the upcoming election, and it leverages the skills of its activists and its high-profile lawyers within the movement to look at a number of areas, including exposing economic corruption, advocating for victims of human rights abuses, organizing demonstrations, and undertaking political advocacy, especially for the creation of a shadow government, but also preparing candidates for parliamentary elections in 2025, 2026, etc., and educating the public about citizenship and democratic values. So I will park this for a second. We can come back to it if there's interest in this. The reality is that one cannot at this point but underline and keep underlying is that the protest movement as you yourself have pointed out in your opening remarks, have had to deal with structural constraints and really concerted attacks against them aimed at eliminating competition, whether it's violence perpetuated by security forces, Iran-affiliated or Sadr-affiliated militias with often quasi-governmental standing, or targeted political assassinations and kidnapping, as we've known. I think it's important to point out that the Independent High Commission for Human Rights of Iraq has reportedly registered 81 assassination attempts against anti-government activists and journalists since the demonstrations began, 34 of which have been successful. So continuing to decry, document, and expose this is essential. I think the exact effect of these murders, again, something we can discuss in more detail, on Iraqi politics is difficult to measure. I think there is no calculation of candidates that refuse to run out of fear. However, there is no doubt that the militia's use of violence and the impunity of the legal system really diminishes trust in a system that's already plagued by distrust. So my colleagues have also pointed out that beyond just violence, financing is the second most challenging obstacle for nascent parties and civic organizers. Private funds has been a challenge for newcomers, and Iraq hasn't implemented the use of the public financing option under the political parties law. So this would be a huge benefit for nation parties that have met the IHEC requirement but struggle to raise money. That says, one needs to point out some hopeful successes in fundraising, like crowdsourcing opportunities that were undertaken by smaller parties and that are beginning to gain traction. Now, unfortunately, in terms of prospects, it was left to the presumably traditional reform-minded parties who might have usefully articulated opposition to kind of undertake change. But by their presence in post-elections, they will, and their likely win, they will end up validating the existing system and the political class. Looking ahead, I think the focus should be on ensuring a minimum win for independent voices of dissent as a bridge for change. If we're looking at a negative outlook, or what I'm reading in at least my two panelists who are dealing with these issues on the ground, I think it will be important to make sure to get, against all odds, new voices in parliament, voices of dissent, even if we're not talking about a landslide change. The idea is to ensure there's a bridgehead in parliament that is articulating a principled position. And the nascent parties will win seats. The question is how many of these seats will be won? Again, at IRI, I can't help but mention this, but we are planning to support losing candidates for them to remain active and remain relevant. So I think, yes, the results will preserve the status quo and further delegitimize the Iraqi state, but also legitimize, and this is something that was brought up in the Q&A, I looked at it very quickly, will also legitimize Iranian influence. We can't not mention this. Results may elevate the Hajj as well as a backbone of the state, not because of popularity, but because of lack of organization on the part of the others. I think Munqith brought some of this up. It has to be said that Iraqis are discouraged in participating or in believing that their votes will lead to meaningful change because of Iraq's entrenched deep state, where Iran-backed militias that act outside of government's control and provides armed support to pro-Iranian political groups put the interest of Iran before the interest of their own state to maintain power. So I think the ability of independent candidates to undertake meaningful reform will be limited due to the power sharing arrangement that has led to the situation that we're in and the widespread corruption that protesters have decried. All that says, and I'm conscious of the time, I'll just close it out. If you want me to talk about elections monitoring, we can perhaps do this in a Q&A. Iraqis should not, in my view, boycott election, but they should be selective about who they vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And thank you also for sort of moving this sort of fast forwarding to the aftermath of the election. And that sort of brings me to what I want to pose to all of you before we get to the Q&As. And that is, obviously the data gives us a very bleak picture that the election won't be a game changer. Rahman has given us great detail about what's happening on the ground in terms of voter apathy. We see that there could be more protests, that the militias could enact more violence. And I also want to sort of refine my own statement. The violence against the protesters is not just coming from the militias, it's also coming from the state security forces that we saw in 2019 and 2020. So it's not just a problem that exists among the militias and of course within the Sadrist movement, which has opposed the protests. So I think that Patricia has given us a really good perspective to sort of ask the obvious question, which I've always, I always ask about any sort of opposition or protest movement in the Middle East. In the Middle East, we see that change in Egypt, good or bad, came over many decades. It wasn't something that happened from one protest movement. You could even say that the Arab uprisings in Egypt started in 2008 with a protest that was based on economic issues. So I guess my question for you is, even though we're trying to analyze this from this moment in time ahead of this election, how do all of you sort of forecast what the social implications have been on the protest movement in the long term? And Rahman, you mentioned that the government formation will be difficult. So are we going to see, as Patricia is telling us, that actually some of these protesters will try to influence this formation, even though they may not, of course, win a lot of seats in the parliament? So are we going to see any sort of societal reaction that could move the needle, despite the data, despite the violence that might occur? Are we going to see anything unexpected, an unexpected reaction from society that could influence and sort of interrupt what the data and what the picture looks at this moment? So I'd like to sort of hear from you before we get to the Q&As. Thank you.
Thank you, Geneive. Geneive, what we talked about, kind of what we see. But this is, again, Iraq. This is the election that, I failed to mention, we have third of the candidate are independents. So people could win up to 35 seat as independent. Which is, as Patricia also mentioned, this could be a game changer for us. Second, I don't think we are going to 2018 election anymore. I think there is more a kind of public pressure. I think there is more kind of, even within government, within militia, within protest is a player right now as public or people movement, not as institution. And that's the problem, because we as Iraqi or as a protester, we still kind of leveling the field for these people is not happening. We still kind of, you process, I work with one of political party. It's hard to establish and run a political party in 6 months and with candidates and trained candidates. So it's like you creating from zero a political party to run and get seats. It's totally hard. But again, I think Iraqi people are not going back to 2018. They are not going back to 2019. With whoever wins is not going to the seat who decide who is going to go to the government. I think the street is going to decide who is going to be in the government. I think the pressure which we're going to lose is a tangible seat in the parliament, but we also still have the street. And that's kind of the balance of the power in Iraq right now. There is the militia, organized political party, and there is kind of the organic resistance in the street. So these kind of, when you come and sit on the negotiation table, I guarantee you, nobody is going to sit on that table, think, oh, I have 35 seats, nobody is going to say a word. No, people had 54 seats before. I had 52 seats, but then they have to give in for the people. It's kind of the engagement of the people totally is different. Is not translated to a political institution right now, but it will be a huge political pressure. That's what I'm seeing, what I'm involved in, what I expect.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on this before we get to the Q&A?
Yeah, actually, it's very difficult to expect the political dynamics which will take place after the election, but for sure the protesters will be one of the decisive factors in forming the new election and putting pressures on the negotiations between different parties. And what can increase that pressures if the Sadrist does not win what they expect to win, then for sure they will join the protest to put more pressures and to play more role in getting a good part in the coming government. It will be a very difficult process. The Prime Minister, as I can see questions about it, the Prime Minister will not be decided by the ballots. It will be decided by negotiation.
Thank you. Patricia, would you like to add anything?
I would like just to add, to add to what my colleagues by taking a step back and just pointing to the fact that the issues, I believe, are the problems. The issues are very much entrenched and sort of rooted in a system that is that is built on an ethno-sectarian power-sharing formula that really has entrenched corruption in a way that makes it difficult. So change, in thinking about change, I think when you think about the sort of boulder that is involved with systemic change, where the system is really sort of functions in such a way as to just to say the system functions in such a way as to people, the political party, the political parties in power benefit from the system because of the way that it's structured. So, for example, one sort of number that's brandished often is state payroll that grew from 800,000 to 9 million, from 800,000 in 2014 to 9 million in 2016. So political parties benefit from the state in such a way as change will be difficult. I think the hope is that in the protest, the character of the protest, its makeup is the Shia South, disaffected youth who are sort of choosing not to turn to militias, but to kind of protest. So the fact is there's a genuine sense and a movement for change that is under attack. The question is, in the short term, how much of this change is likely to happen? I think we need to look at the long term and to look at how to equip this protest movement, how to transform it, how to equip it with tactics, tools, strategy, and how to have it work with media, with civil society to talk about exposing some of this corruption as it is working on a political strategy, whether post-election or beyond.
Thank you. Yes, the point you make about the ethno-sectarian power-sharing system, of course, is at the root of a lot of the problems in Iraq and, of course, in Lebanon. Thank you. So let me get to the questions now. So the one question is, will the Prime Minister likely be the selection of Prime Minister likely be quicker this time than it was in 2018? And as people might recall, it took many months for a compromise candidate to be selected, which was the former Prime Minister Abdo, who then was ousted from power as part of the demands from the protest movement. So I guess that obviously, because one of the keys in the government formation is the selection of the Prime Minister, perhaps we could get your views on how you see the selection of the Prime Minister. And even though the current Prime Minister, Mr. Khatami, is not running, there are certainly indications that he would like to remain in power. So if I could pose this question to all of you, how likely is it that he could remain in power? He seems to be someone that certainly Washington is comfortable with, and that Iran at least may not prefer, but is not openly trying to remove him from power. And as we know, it is essential for both of these two countries to sort of somewhat reach some consensus. That's certainly a factor in how a Prime Minister is selected in Iraq. So could I get your views on how you see the next Prime Minister taking shape?
When I start, let me start. Okay, is it going to be quicker? I think with the rule of the federal court that the winner of the election this time is get the highest seat. So that's helped a little bit, helped by if the Sadrist is going to win, they nominate their Prime Minister. So at least we are not going to go for the court for 3-4 months to decide. So this is going to be quicker. As I said, it's going to be kind of the negotiation who would bring the Prime Minister, not really the winner of election. Because if you get 35 seats, you need 165 seats to nominate yours to get the Prime Minister seat. Before that, you need to nominate the president so he can appointed or at least the speakers, and the speaker to appointed the Prime Minister. So that's a process, not just the Prime Minister. As Karam is not running as a candidate, he has no political party as in this election. Still, as I think he did very well in this office. So his opportunity, it's kind of if others want him, if the Sadrist want him, if the national state bloc want him, I don't think he has a problem there. And I don't think he has a problem with the Kurd or the Sunni. It depends if the Fatah win the election, then he has a problem, But he's going to be player. He's going to be one of the names that will be posted for this job earlier. As I said earlier, there are people still kind of presenting names for the Prime Minister. They start shopping them. They start also market them in Washington, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia. So these kind of activity is going right now within that frame of work. But probably we will see a Prime Minister by January.
Thank you. Patricia, Munqith, would you like to comment on this question?
Well, if you look to all governments established in Iraq, except the first government established by Ja'fari back in 2005, all other prime ministers, they didn't win the election, all of them, not one single exception. So the winner is not necessarily can nominate the prime minister. Till now, the chances of Kadhimi are good, even for Iran, even for others. I think the international community wants Kadhimi to stay, but the problem with the national, I mean, it's as Rahman said, if Fatah win, then he might have a serious problem in that. Otherwise, I think he don't have a real challenger with other or among other political segments.
Thank you. Patricia, would you like to comment before I go to the next question?
No, go ahead. I mean, I'll defer to my colleagues.
Okay, thank you. So one question which I think is interesting, and I'll broaden it a bit. It says, the question is, what sector percentage of Iraqi Shia view the Iranian theocratic system as a model for an Iraqi government? And I think that in the context of the protest movement, we should also sort of add, has this anti-Iranian sentiment that has been so much on display since the protest movement began, is this going to affect the election outcome? So all of you have mentioned, as we expect, that Fatah could do well. But how does this sort of, I guess the question that's being asked is, I guess, aside from the specific Shia parties, how do the Shia in general view the Iranian system, and is the kind of expression that we've seen from the protest movement, is this very widespread, and how might this affect in terms of which coalitions will prevail and be influential in forming the next government?
Yeah. May I answer this, because I wrote many pieces in the Washington Post.
Yes, please go ahead.
And I wrote many pieces in the Washington Post, in the Washington Institute, and CSIS about this specific situation or specific point. Iran has lost its soft power in Iraq. The power of being an example for Iraqi Shias is not there anymore. On 2019, for the first time since we started polls in Iraq, the level of support, the level of favorability to Iran in comparison with United States, for the first time, though the United States always was low, for the first time, the Iranian support was lower than the Iranians, among Shias than the support for United States, though both are less than 20%. So it's very clear that and this process has started since a decade, a steady decrease in the level of support of the Iranian example in Iraq. Yet they are very organized. Those small who are supporting and the Iranian theological system, they are very organized. And with the low turnout, expected turnout, they might be able to have a better say this time than they used to have before.
Okay, thank you. And briefly, we're sort of unfortunately running out of time, but Rahman or Patricia, would you like to briefly comment on this question?
I think the structure of Iraqi government itself will prevent kind of the similar system of Iranian governing. Although, never underestimate kind of the power of money, the power of armed group, and the organization that Munqith. But as a public, as the way of Iraqi want to live, I don't think the Iranian system will fit within the Iraqi community, within also kind of the mosaic of the Iraqi community. I don't see it as a way of living in Iraq, the Iranian governing or the Iraqi government system.
Thank you. So thank you so much to our panelists and our audience for such a detailed and substantive conversation. It's clear we have a roadmap to the elections and maybe even some forecasting of what happens the day after. And I'll turn now the program over to Ambassador Sulaimani. Thank you very much.
Geneive, thank you very much. And I really do want to thank all three of our panelists, Dr. Dagher, Mr. Al-Jebouri, and Dr. Karam, for this unfortunately too short discussion of the upcoming elections and then governance in Iraq afterwards. You have given us, as Geneive said, a lot of good data, a lot of points to look at as the process evolves between now and the elections, and perhaps more importantly, following the elections as the government formation process begins. So thank you all very much for participating today in our program at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. For all of you in the audience, thank you for joining us today. A recording of this program should be available the next day or two on our website, www.agsiw.org, along with a lot of other good discussions of Iraq and the region. So for now, signing off, look forward to seeing you again in a future program. All have a good day.